We have an amazing panel here. We have experience from Miami, from Oregon, from New York, DC, and Los Angeles. So I'm gonna, without further ado, we're gonna allow the panelists to talk about their background in the different cities, and then I'll ask a couple questions, and we'll have an opportunity at the end to engage the audience. So, Lisa, I would love to start with you. Talk a little bit about what you hear and what you think when you think of startup cities.
So when I think of startup cities, I think of cities that have an established ecosystem for the startup community. And I say ecosystem because when you're a startup, there's so many different things that you need. You need obviously financing, but you also need an infrastructure in terms of lawyers and accountants. You need working space. You need a city that recognizes the worth of startups. And so I think that when you're thinking about, if you're an entrepreneur thinking about where do I want to start my company, you want to think about a company that has that ecosystem. I don't know if you want me to talk more about DC or just kind of, okay. So I have a company which is in the public safety space. We have a mobile application that basically allows people to create their own social safety networks. And so the company originally started in Los Angeles, sort of with a predecessor company, and then moved to Washington. DC, that is. And one of the reasons that we moved is because the infrastructure in DC was much more supportive, to this type of company, being the focus, and the place where you got the FBI, you've got everything law enforcement related, but also because there was just a much more open and more, really welcoming environment for particularly an African American-led tech company. Now, Los Angeles has Silicon Beach, which is LA's version of Silicon Valley. And it is a growing and burgeoning community, but as for an African-American entrepreneur, it doesn't have some of the same support structure. So DC has proven to be a very, very beneficial place for us for a number of reasons.
Mr. Samuels, you have historic experience in starting and working in one of the most prolific tech companies in terms of telecommunication, AT&T. You're also involved in some of the amazing things that are going on in Miami in terms of literally starting a city. Can you talk a little bit about your experience, one, in growing a city like Miami Gardens, and then also talking about what you're doing and what you see possible for this unincorporated area?
Fantastic. Thank you very much, and good evening or afternoon to everybody. I come at this probably a little differently. When I first heard the term startup city, I thought, wow, that's great, because I've been in the process for the past 10 years, be it all hiatus in between, not driven by us, but to start a city in the middle of Dade County, and with the idea of it being a smart city. So imagine you have an area, some cities are already started obviously, and to your point about having the infrastructure in place, things in place, well, in part of this area, we are at ground zero. So you can make whatever you want. You can start it from the beginning and then grow it into being whatever it is you want to do. So Startup City, to me, is a perfect way to start your business, grow your business. My background, I've worked for AT&T for 30 years, Lucent Technology, which was a part of AT&T, and been involved in technology from turning the screwdriver all the way through to managing a territory for a group of salespeople. All that time, in my mind, I was an entrepreneur. And so I've always had a business. I think in the 11th grade, I said I want to be an entrepreneur. I learned how to spell it. And then set out to be an entrepreneur. And everything that I have done has been from that perspective, how to fix something, solve a problem, create something different. And pretty excited to have been a part of this, and I think the future of this is very, very bright for all of the efforts that can go on as a result of this. But my background has been in telecommunications. Right now, I'm currently involved in educational type applications and technologies. It feeds my social entrepreneur mindset. But as Dr. Getswood has mentioned, being a part of and observing cities start from ground zero like we are, and to try and do all those things up front to make it become whatever the vision is or whatever you want it to be. And I think that's the exciting part for those of you that are sitting here and you're wanting to be entrepreneurs. You know, those of us with gray hair and no hair probably can share a lot of things with you that you might not see up front. Our histories are pretty varied and deep. And I think an opportunity to share that is always foremost on my mind.
So Jonathan and Mike, you work with Scale Up Partners, which is an amazing company and have experience in Portland, Oregon, and that provides a different dynamic. So we just heard Mr. Samuel talk about Miami and not really having the infrastructure yet. Can you speak to what the infrastructure looks like in terms of startups in Portland and then startups in terms of creating the city and the ecosystem and what that looks like, particularly as it relates to people of African descent, Black people?
Okay, I appreciate that. I'll start. I'm Mike, and Jonathan can clean up. And Jonathan's out of Cleveland. I'm out of Oregon. I'm actually out of Southern Oregon. But one of the things that Oregon is known for is we're sitting right between Silicon Valley in the south. That's your Northern California area. And then we have Silicon Forest up in the north. That's your Seattle. That's where your Amazon and your Microsoft and your Boeing. And so we're right in there in between. And the number of Black population in Portland itself, which is in the northern part of the state, is very small. We're talking about 6%. But you'd be amazed at what's happening in Portland, which is, has a tech-driven ecosystem, local innovation ecosystem, and we have 5 main drivers, growth drivers in that. But one of the things that I wanted to mention when you talk about startup cities, a little over a year ago, a list came out of the top 25 startup cities, startup ecosystems in the country. And of those 25 cities, Colorado had 5. Oregon had 3. And one of the ones that should have been on the list and is probably going to be on the next list that comes out is sitting in my backyard in Southern Oregon. And virtually no Black people are involved in these. So when you start talking about startup cities, you're talking about local innovation ecosystems. And when you talk about local innovation ecosystems, you're talking about something that doesn't have quite the narrative, economic narrative in our communities. And one of the things that Scale Up does, Scale Up Partners is a national consultancy that does 3 things. The first one, as our priority, is to change our economic narrative so that we start to speak the same language, have the same lexicon and vernacular of the knowledge-based, tech-driven, globally competitive innovation economy. We're understanding that language and we're understanding the game. So changing the economic narrative is our #1 priority. Number 2 is promoting inclusive competitiveness. Inclusive competitiveness is simply empowering underrepresented populations to compete in the innovation economy. Compete, not participate. And so the third one is to connect economically disconnected communities to their local innovation ecosystems. And if they don't know what their local innovation ecosystems are, and we typically live right next door to them, some of us can literally throw a rock outside our window and hit the interior of a local innovation ecosystem and not know what it is. So connecting local innovation connecting economically disconnected communities to their local innovation ecosystems is our third priority. But since they don't know what that is, we go back to #1, it's changing the economic narrative. Now, Scale Up Partners has been doing this for the past 5 years, ever since I wrote a article in the Huffington Post. Also, my background's in media, national media, New York Times, CNN, Dow Jones. I wrote an article called The Innovation Crisis in Black America. And this guy popped up on my radar screen. When you talk about innovation crisis in Black America, when you talk about inclusive competitiveness, and you talk about competing in a game that we typically are not aware of, and a game that's constantly changing, so that even the folks who are competing in it that know about it in Silicon Valley and elsewhere in some of the second mover areas, these folks are constantly racing to keep up. They don't have time to educate the folks who haven't been educated. Well, what inclusive competitiveness is an opportunity for us to catapult into this game and to win. Jonathan is the only person I have met in the entire country who has the background, who has the experience, who has the knowledge to lead this effort. So we are pioneers in this landscape of inclusive competitiveness all over the country. With that, I'll turn it over to John.
Now, how do you follow that? What an introduction. Thank you very much. Very quickly, to build off of Mike's and all the panelists' points, which are all spot on, let's do a little bit of sobering level setting. Let's talk about the economic productivity of our communities, Black and brown, African American, Latino, as described by the U.S. Census. Together, we comprise about 30% of the population. Our economic productivity of 30% of the population amounts to about 3.5% of GDP. African Americans have 1.9 million businesses, thumbs up. Only 900,000 employees. How about this for a 1 million jobs program? The average Black-owned business has 1 employee. This is the imperative that inclusive competitiveness addresses. Why don't our businesses scale? One chief reason why they don't scale is we're not in the growth sectors of our economies. So when we talk about startup cities, we have wonderful examples throughout the nation. Not one is an inclusive startup city. But that is a dual responsibility, both incumbent upon the ecosystems as well as on the people, i.e. us, to prepare to compete, to be contributing assets in our innovation economy. My background began in the innovation economy back in 2000, where I led the establishment of Sensitech, the regional technology organization for the city or the region of Cincinnati, Ohio. But my background was in community development, neighborhood development, civil rights advocacy. And I literally crossed over into innovation-based economic development. So my lens is informed by my community work, but bringing that lens to the new game, meeting the puck, the proverbial puck, where it is going, not where it is, and Lord forbid, not where it has already been. So that's what inclusive competitiveness is all about. So I begin my assessment of a startup city is whether or not we are contributing assets within that startup city. And heretofore, largely, that answer is no.
So let's add to that a little bit. You talked about that we're not involved in those main sectors, and we're here at Black Tech Week. So what would those sectors be? What does that look like? Lisa, if you could.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree and disagree with some of the things you're saying. I agree that to some degree we are not involved in tech to the extent that we should be, but I think that there's a lot of complex reasons why. And I think the primary reason why is because we do not have access to that same entry level of funding. When you talk about Black businesses don't scale, the reason Black businesses don't scale primarily is because they do not have access to those initial levels of funding that will allow them to move up that ladder. I mean, if you look, I've been involved, my background is the entertainment industry. I'm a lawyer, but I was in the entertainment industry for a number of years and moved over to digital media. And so what I have observed is that when you look at the white startup community, they have within their own community, their own friends and family circle, they have that initial $50,000 to $100,000 to $200,000 that their parents can write. If you look at Black wealth versus white wealth, Black wealth is primarily asset-based. It's their home, it's their car, it's hard, fixed, non-liquid assets. White wealth is primarily equities, which is by its nature liquid. And so the problem is not that I believe that there's a lack of innovation. To the contrary, Black people are the worldwide innovators. Coming from the entertainment industry, Black people run the world. We don't even realize this. When you go somewhere, if you listen to the music, you look at TV, you look at movies, it's our product, our creative product. So we are an innovative community by definition. But in order to fuel innovation, you need money. And the problem is that the funding sources are not there at the initial levels, and even at the angel and the super angel level, they still have certain types of parameters that are very difficult for us to meet when we don't have that initial level of funding. And so I think that the conversation needs to be recentered on how do we marshal the financial resources both within our community and outside of our community so that you have an economic base that can fuel the innovation that is there and that is struggling and that is asking to be fueled, and no one is responding. And that's my opinion, having been on the entertainment business as well as now on the tech side.
And I concur largely with what you said. Your experience is absolutely right. My point is, my sense is that the comments begin at B, access to capital. My analysis begins at A, and the idea. Black-owned businesses are overwhelmingly in construction, supplier diversity, largely of commodity products and services, and not in the intellectual property base that fuels scalable many, not all, but many scalable enterprises. So my narrative complements yours. It was not intended to compete with yours, but my analysis begins with the idea. How do we generate more ideas? Because we're top-notch in our STEM and STEAM education and the sciences that produce the intellectual property that is often applied into the market to create breakthrough enterprises. We have not been competitive there. We certainly have been innovators. I concur with you 100%. We are innovators. But let's convert that into real intellectual property and build enterprises off of the intellectual property that can scale, and that's where the big gap has been.
And again, it's a financial gap, though, because I agree with you in some sense, but I'm knee-deep in the entrepreneurial community in a number of cities, DC, LA, a number of places. And when I talk to entrepreneurs, particularly younger entrepreneurs who are recent college grads, and I listen to some of the ideas that they have, and they are truly cutting-edge ideas. I mean, truly cutting-edge ideas. And they need maybe $10,000 or $15,000 or $25,000, and they can't get that. And I look at their white counterparts, and they need 15, 25, 30,000. Their parents write it, or their neighbor writes it. You know, I had a friend of mine who runs one of the studios in LA. His wife wrote a $200,000 check to the founders of Snapchat back when Snapchat was just an idea. How many of us have someone who's going to write us a $200,000 check because we have a good idea? Not too many.
So we're hearing a debate around whether this is an industry-focused issue in terms of an internal community movement or a capital-focused issue in terms of do we have the baseline capital to raise it? And I want to add another layer to that and then pitch this to sort of Mr. Samuels. We were talking in the green room about the idea that this conference is called Black Tech Week and that in and of itself is disruptive, right? Because we often don't think about what it takes to pool our resources. And I want to add to that the Black hair care industry, for example, is a $30 billion industry, that the Black music and entertainment industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So, and you see all these individuals here that we are in industries that have disruptive potential, and we are in industries that we rarely see us spending that people thought it was innovation, for example, for Felicia and Derek to hire Arnisha to do the catering, who is also a Black business here, right? That wasn't the norm and what people thought about. So I wanted to sort of offer an opportunity for Mr. Samuels to jump in terms of the formation of a Black city, Miami being in the space of starting to do that. What do you think about this debate about whether we need to expand our industries, whether we need to expand our capital access, or whether we need to expand our consciousness to work with each other? Because I think that's a dynamic that I don't want to get lost in this conversation and a main part of this conference.
Well, I'll give you a good example of me. I worked for 30 years. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So when I retired early, I said, now I can go become the multimillionaire that I was born to be. So I thought of this great idea of establishing global phone center stores all around the world, because I didn't believe that people would continue to buy cell phones and other things over online always. There would always be a need to have a place you can walk into. So I crafted the idea. It's great. Some venture capitalists came to me and said, we'll give you $25 million. Won't give it to you, but we'll invest that in but you'll have to give up 85% of your company. I'm sophisticated, you offer me that deal today, I'm running home with you. But back then, this is my business, I don't want to give up 85%, they went away. So, back to your question, I think it's a combination of a number of things. Obviously, capital is, without money, you're not going to be able to do much. Access to the capital, critical and important. The SBA has in one of my favorite, or most, it's not a favorite word of mine, but the term minority. It defines people. It's a federal term, but you know, I've never called myself a minority. I don't think anybody should be called a minority because it says you're minimal. In some way or another, you're not what you can be. But the access to capital, like the Small Business Administration, I don't remember them having a black loan program. I remember a minority or a woman-owned program, but no black. That says a lot about where you want to put the focus. And to the term of black tech, I mean, I'm inspired by that because many years ago I wanted to have an organization called Blacks in Communications. And when I go to many different shows now, there are very few of us at the shows where all of this is taking place. You have to go there. If you don't go there, you're not part of what's going on. Follow the people who are following the money, I say. So the capital issue is a big issue, but it speaks to a much bigger issue, the one that you spoke of, is how do you start out developing or building wealth. That's your number one objective, to build wealth even before you have the idea, to build the capacity before you have the idea. Because many of us have great ideas, but we're not able to implement them because we don't have the money. So understanding finance, to your point about where your wealth is, because we've been told that you buy a house and now you're somehow or another you're wealthy, and that's really not an asset that you can do much with except create more debt. So final on this is I think we need the capital. We have to learn how to pool the capital together, figure out how to use those advantages that we do have, the talents that we do, we convert that to money. I mean, we got a lot of great athletes who have lots of money to give and spend here, but we need to tap into that resource, and that's where our assets are. Otherwise, no matter how great your idea is, if you don't have the money like Elizabeth Holmes did of creating an idea, if you know who Elizabeth Holmes is, she has an $83 billion company now that she built in 10 years from a single idea of a drop of blood to get a study done on blood without having to go through the full expense. If she didn't have the money to do that and make that work, it wouldn't have worked. So I think it's capital. We have to figure out ways to get capital, pool our own capital. There's nothing wrong with collaborating and being a part of other people. We do have to get to where the money is, or find the money, and don't be apprehensive as I was about taking the money from the people who have the money. Ideas come a mile a minute. I could have come up with 10 other ideas if I had taken that 15%.
But what I think I'm hearing Lisa talk about is institutional infrastructure and having the infrastructure in terms of your community, which is really what this panel is about. So let me offer a concrete example. You guys are authorities on this topic, so you could advise me. So I had some friends that came to me and they had an idea to start a company where, and everybody knows this is the biggest company in ecotech. We have 17, but we have one called Earthware, which makes utensils out of potato, right? Revolutionary, could change the market, and yet there was no ecosystem to support product-based businesses, right? So we had an opportunity to sit with the reporter for the Miami Herald, and she said she wanted to do an article on us, and we said, why? Because you're the tech writer and we're kind of green tech. And she said, well, actually, I get 200 to 300 product-based business plans every year for company ideas, and we never let them win. We never let them win. Any product-based businesses, they'll allow tech to win the Miami Business Plan Challenge. They'll allow you have a hospitality and tourism idea. Why? Because there's no ecosystem here for product-based businesses. So it's not that the ideas aren't out there, that'll be my little pushback. It's not that the ideas didn't exist. It's that because they didn't have the supports, if they allowed them to win, for them to actually flourish, they just didn't even pay attention to those 200 to 300 plans, which I think sort of points to what you're speaking to. And I want to know what you guys think about that. It's particularly, Mike, since you haven't jumped into the conversation, but really, what do you think about the importance that the ecosystem plays in an entrepreneur's process, or is it unnecessary? If you're powerful, and you'll make it happen.
Okay, I'm going to solve everybody's problem.
All right. Yes.
We're going to solve capital, infrastructure, ideas and education, collaboration. We're going to solve it all. When I first was invited here to Miami, and Jonathan can tell you this, I did something that I'll bet you no one in this room has ever done. I got on the phone and I talked to the Regional Development Organization. Does anyone know who the Regional Development Organization is for the South Florida region?
Beacon Council.
South Florida Regional Council, someone said. So I made an appointment, and Jonathan and I went and sat down with the executive director. They are now working on engaging us to help them develop a more inclusive local innovation ecosystem here in the South Florida region. And we do that all over the country. There are 540 regional development organizations. None of them have an inclusive local innovation ecosystem plan. All of them are commissioned and paid by public-private partnership funds to do exactly that, to create the conditions for wealth generation, job growth, for that innovation ecosystem to thrive. And yet, if you take into consideration their comprehensive economic development strategies plan, this is what it's called, CEDS, C-E-D-S, Comprehensive Economic Development Strategies Plan. And if you go to NADO.org, N-A-D-O, you will find all of these organizations across the country. And if you read their plans, and I read your plan here in South Florida, it does not include black and brown people. Now here's the good news. By 2050, black and brown folks, by themselves, will be 42% of the population of the country. You cannot have 42% of your population producing 4% of your GDP. It is impossible to reach your economic competitiveness goals if that is the case. And therefore, you must empower these people. And you know what they're doing? They're talking about it. There's the Inclusive Capitalism Conference. Anybody heard of the Inclusive Capitalism Conference? 220 of the world's wealthiest people came together last year. They invited Bill Clinton to London, where they held this conference. The Rothschilds held it. And 220 of the world's wealthiest people with a combined net worth greater than the GDP of the entire United States in that one room. They were talking about how do we transform this capitalist system that we built upon a foundation of exclusivity into one of inclusiveness. The Federal Reserve's talking about it. You obviously know what the tech sector is talking about in Silicon Valley. Intel devoted $300 million as of last month to diversifying its workforce, to diversifying its board, and they said that's just the beginning. Google, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Facebook, they're all falling in line. Texas Instruments, the vice president said, we want to give you money, he said to HBCU presidents, but you don't have a plan. You're not collaborating together. We don't have anything we can invest in. There's money out there. The Social Innovation Fund that President Obama put together, and foundations, impact investors, Kellogg, Ford Foundation, you name it, they're putting money together to try and invest in helping startups, by us, especially tech startups. But we don't have a collaborative ecosystem into which they can invest in. We can build it, but we've got to collaborate with the RDOs because those innovation ecosystems already exist. We're not going to do something separate. We're going to connect into it, and we're going to contribute to it, and we're going to extract value from it, and we're going to get paid to do that because they need the money in order to build these ecosystems, but they need us in order to build them. So we have a place to start, right where we are, wherever we are.
Booker T. Washington said, cast down your buckets where you are. That's what we're talking about. Right here in Miami, Dade County, in Cleveland, Ohio, in Washington, D.C., in Portland, Oregon, all over the place, we have these regional innovation ecosystems. They have been substantially financed by public sector dollars, both government and private philanthropy, for example. What these ecosystems do is de-risk, ultimately, deals for the private sector. I go back to the primacy of the idea, because if the idea is not protectable and has a low barrier to entry, it will be super difficult within a capitalist system to attract private sector investors. You may be able to attract investment from friends and family. You may be able to mortgage your home and get debt finance. But keep in mind what private capital is. It is equity positions based on your idea and the trajectory of that idea. And the team you build, as Mike says in my ear. And that's why I focus so much there. And I encourage us to think about, while not at all, as a matter of fact, I think my position complements the positions of Lisa and Matt as well. But I encourage us to think about the ideas, moving from exclusive, not exclusively, nearly exclusively service-based kinds of businesses in construction and commodity supplier diversity. All good stuff. All good stuff. What we're advocating, what I'm advocating, doesn't take the place of that. But we have done little to connect to where the proverbial puck is going. And we look at the models that are successful, largely coming out of STEM and STEAM education, producing intellectual property off of which new enterprises are created. We're just not competing. Can we? Absolutely. So that's why I continue to advocate that position.
So Jonathan, if I hear you correctly, I hear you saying that we're not dreaming big enough, and then we're not putting the skills behind it to actually have it materialize into a venture worth capital investment.
And that, but sister, that is real. And in the private market, we're still the United States of capitalism.
So what can we do in terms of conversion? Because that's one of the things that we do at Ecotech. We take these small ideas and we help to transition them into ideas that can be moved from that mom and pop space into the space of large or middle manufacturing, or into the space of disruptive technology. What does that look like in terms of us, the individuals in this room? So you're talking to us. What does that look like for us? And I would ask everyone this question, because we're going to wrap up in a few. So what does that look like for us to create that ecosystem? You're talking about a knowledge ecosystem, an innovation ecosystem around really thinking of ideas that have disruptive potential in investment language, that hockey stick. So how are we creating that hockey stick in our business models so that we're investable? Lisa?
I think the first thing to do is think about the market. You have to think about the market, because let's look at Uber, for instance. Uber is not a technology-based idea per se. Yes, they have technology that allows them to match the drivers with the people, but essentially they looked at the market. They said this is a very mature market, taxis. No one's really happy with taxis. So we're going to disrupt that mature market with a different way of looking at it. So in a sense, it created a hybrid between a service and a technology. And so I think that in order to create those scalable ideas, you have to think about how big is my market. If I'm thinking about a dry cleaner, then there's only so many people that a dry cleaner can serve. If I'm thinking about something that I physically have to put my time into it, I only have 24 hours a day, and I really don't have 24 hours a day. So I think that you really have to think about how big is the market. If you start and think about, is this a worldwide market, or is this a regional market, or is this just a market for my neighborhood? If it's just a market for your neighborhood, unless you can aggregate all the other neighborhoods, you probably don't want to do it. But if it's for the world, or the country, or at least the region, then it's something worth your time.
I think the key is knowledge is power. So to Lisa's point, you really need to understand the market. And I don't mean just a cursory look at the market. You really need to understand the details of the market, and it's changing every day, every minute, every hour. So if you pick an industry that one of the growth industries that you want to participate in, and you see where things are going, because everything is up and down, and you want to be at the up part of the market, and you got to be very flexible. And life is not fair. It just will never be. So you have to have the willpower to fail. You're going to fail more times than you're going to succeed. You have to have the stomach for that. It's the recovery and getting up and go to the next one. And if people see that in you, they will give money. You can't build yourself as a black entrepreneur. You have to build yourself as an entrepreneur. It happens to be black. That's it. And once you start from that premise, you know that your idea is, even if it's even, you may not get accepted. It's got to be better. The mantra that our teachers gave us is, you're going to have to be twice as good. I didn't know any better, so I made myself twice as good on everything I did. And I succeeded. I wasn't bitter because I had to be twice as good. I said, you know what, that helped me. And so to what do we need to do? I think whatever it is your idea, you need to be focused on it, committed to it, work hard at it, and become an expert about it, and ask yourself all the hard questions. And when the answers don't come back right, throw them in the garbage can and start with some new ones.
And Mike, final word on this question?
Well, I think you have to solve a problem. You have to solve a problem that people want you to solve and will pay for it in the market. But here's something you have to also know. You have to know that your market and all the markets are being orchestrated. The game is being controlled. And you need to know how the game is controlled in your area, because every region is not the same. And that's why I told you, Comprehensive Economic Development Strategies Plan at your Regional Development Organization, they gather all this data. They know what your growth sectors are. They know where the jobs are going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. When you're a freshman in college and you graduate, that economic system has already been determined. If you graduated in English or philosophy or something, and you're not in those sectors, or you're an entrepreneur and you started a business that isn't in those growth sectors, and you're out there trying to beat the bushes for money, they know where the money is. We have to be at those strategy tables. And guess what? They want us there. They can't find us because we're scattered. We need to be collaborative and work together. We need to be engaged. We need to build teams. And we need to invest in one another.
Jonathan, you look like you have a burning
I
comment.
do. It's a burning comment, and I appreciate the perspectives of all the panel, and I think we're more aligned than not aligned. I want to build on Matt's point about he emphasizes entrepreneur. The best definition of entrepreneurship I've ever read comes from Professor Howard Stevenson at Harvard. An entrepreneur is someone who pursues opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. Period. Pursuing opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. That's the willpower, that's the competitor that we must continue to nurture and cultivate, not just in our athletes. And I was an athlete, I was an NFL athlete, but taking that same level of competitiveness and bringing it into the game. Black Tech Week should call it Black Hack Tech Week, because we are hacking in the truest sense of the word, technology and innovation.
Love it. So just final question before I open it up to the audience, because I'm sure there's some burning questions that you all would love to ask this illustrious panel. Please share a resource. So we talked about what needs to happen. Where can our audience get the resources for this conversation? You could talk about who's your mentor, who they should read, what's the book that sort of can be the guiding light. Please share that, because I want to write notes.
Very good. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
ScaleUpPartners.com.
I love it.
That's your #1 resource of inclusive competitiveness in the United States, and we are glad to help in any market across the world.
Okay, Mike, same answer, different answer?
Actually, I want to say something that we missed. something historic happened last November. The state of Ohio, because of this man right here. By the way, if you don't know State Science Technology Institute, SSTI.org, I would know that. Because of this man right here, the Ohio Board of Regents, a political body that governs the entire higher education ecosystem in the state of Ohio, unanimously adopted a report of inclusive competitiveness as a policy to inculcate statewide. It is the only state in the nation that's ever done that. It is a 72-page policy report that was just adopted last November, and Jonathan and I wrote it. That is going to spread across the United States. We must inculcate inclusive competitiveness as a framework in all of our higher education systems around the country. And check out SSTI.org, and you'll learn more about these local innovation ecosystems and how inclusive competitiveness is being inculcated in them, and also about STEM being STEAM, with the arts involved, STEAM education. That is the entry point to that high-wage, tech-based workforce and that high-growth, tech-driven entrepreneurial landscape.
Mac, what's a resource?
Well, I need to follow along and get my name of my company out of this Global Excellence Technology commercial. But I think the resource that I would recommend probably more than anything else is go to tech expos. Immerse yourself in there, spend the time, and usually for $50 you can be at an exhibit, you can talk for hours, 2 hours, 3 times a day if you want to, and you talk to people who are doing it. It's better than a book because you can clarify information that you need. I read a lot. I think most people who are in this business, you read a lot, you must read a lot. If you don't read a lot of things about a lot of things, you're going to be limited. Period. You might have an idea that you're working on, and an idea is already matured, and it's gone. And so disruptive technology, the first part, you got to disrupt your own mindset and how you think. And whatever you're doing now is getting you where you are. If you want to be at a different level, you're going to have to do something totally different, and you need to figure out what that is. And once you figure out what that is, I'm sure it'll be the right thing, but it's all based on how much knowledge of whatever kind you can put in your mind, and it's a constant every day. I mean, we're the best computer on the planet. You can't duplicate what we can do in our heads. But you can abuse it by not putting the right things in it. But I say the best resource is find people who are doing what you want to do and aspire to, communicate with them, ask them, take them to lunch, whatever. You know, those are the people who are going to give you the resources and know what the resources are. I know I've made enough mistakes in my life, and I'm here to tell you about them, and I survived them. So you're going to make a lot of mistakes. You're going to have a lot of bumps in the road. You got to pick yourself up and keep going.
I would say that, and I just take my own experience, when I got in the entertainment industry, I was practicing law, and I really, really, really wanted to be in the entertainment industry, but I knew nothing about it. And so what I did was I read all of the trades for about a year. I read Hollywood Reporter, I read Variety, I read all of the trades, I read cable, ad age, everything that has to do with it. And that's something that I did because I needed to understand the baseline. I needed to understand the names of the players. And so I think that all the other things that have been said have been very valid, but I think if you're really starting from ground zero, where a lot of people are, you need to educate yourself. Now you can go online. I mean, at that time, they really couldn't go online to go to the library. But if you want to be in a particular sector, you need to read all of the trades. That's the first thing, is immerse yourself in the trade so that when you have that conversation with the person who's in there, you'll be able to drop names like, oh, well, what about such and such, or what about this company? You will act, and you will exude an air of confidence because you know what's going on in that business. So you've got to become a vertical expert. You've got to do a deep dive on whatever area you want, and that's something to do on your own. You don't have to spend money to go to a conference. You don't have to try to find someone in that area. That's something you can do by yourself at 3 o'clock in the morning. But that's what you got to do, is just totally immerse yourself.
So to recap, people should look at scaledUp.com, SSTIE.org, go to Tech Expos, SSTI.org, go to Tech Expos, read and surround yourself by like-minded people, be okay with failure, read trades in your sector, and then I want to add to that list, read the top business magazines, like you should be getting Forbes and you should be getting Harvard Business Review, because those fundamentally tell you what's happening in the business world. I want to open it up to the audience because everybody should have an opportunity to talk to these extraordinary people. We have about 5 more minutes, so does anyone have any questions?
Mike, I'm so glad that you hooked into the South Florida Regional Planning Office because I participated in that evaluation, that comprehensive report. And I can share some backstories, but I want you to know that I think that there's a certain value from having those types of issues raised out of your immediate culture, out of your immediate relationship. And that triggered me to also respond to the fact that, you mentioned something about how we need to help each other. I think that there is a value in creating some networks dealing with the issues of inclusive involvement and diversity across our region and across this country. And I think that you guys sound like the perfect initiators of that kind of concept. And I know Felicia heard Black Tech Hack Week. Just when you thought it couldn't get better, right, Felicia? Thanks again. Thanks you.
Well, let me say this real quick because this is very interesting. We practice what we preach. We did not know we were going to meet the type of people we met when we landed here. And we were having breakfast yesterday, and a gentleman walked by, and he just had a few words to say. And in those few words, he ended up sitting down next to us. And in that conversation, we invited him to go with us to the Regional Development Organization and talk with the executive director. And when that guy started throwing out names of people who live here in South Florida that we're from out of town, this guy matched him point for point and went beyond. And because of that guy, we're now getting ready to do business with him here in Jackson, Mississippi, and in a few other places. But guess what? We could have just said, hey, how you doing? Nice to meet you, and let him go. Or he could have sat down and had breakfast with him, and we may not have said, come to our exclusive meeting. But no, you have to collaborate. You have to be open, and you have to invest your time and energy in other folks. And I applaud you. I think you're absolutely on point. Thank you.
Karen Moore with New Synergies Consulting.
And when I hear the back, please say your name and your company so people know who you are and what you do.
Stark Smith, City of Miami Gardens. Specifically, what would you recommend entrepreneurs do once they reach out to the South Florida, ours is the South Florida Regional Planning Council. So I've attended a couple of their meetings, and unlike, I guess, other regional planning councils, they're not doing a lot to reach out, nor are they fostering this receptive atmosphere for entrepreneurs or nonprofits. Our council here is charged with working with municipalities, nonprofits, and the private sector because it's a quasi-governmental entity. So specifically I guess it's a three-part question, specifically what resources should entrepreneurs or stakeholders look for when they attend the meetings or interface with the council members? 1, 2, once those resources are identified, how then are they put to use to benefit not only the company itself, but the community at large? And then 3, how does these planning councils in other parts of the nation perpetuate the positive ecosystem for these businesses to be successful?
Yeah, let me.
I don't know if you guys caught all 3 parts of that, but
I'm going to try the first and
Okay.
the last. And the first, in terms of the entrepreneur and reaching out, keep in mind, most of the outreach to minority communities is classic small business council.
Yes.
Thumbs up, love small businesses. But that's not what we're talking about when we start talking about higher growth entrepreneurship. So over the past 20 years, there's been an infrastructure across the nation of organizations that are primarily accelerators and other kinds of venture development organizations. Forgive me, I don't know what they are in Miami other than Miami Labs. But these kinds of organizations exist in every mid to major market in the U.S. 1776 in Washington, D.C., for example, has gotten a lot of play over the last couple of years around growing higher growth enterprises. And lastly, in terms of reaching out, keep in mind your regional planning groups are your roadmap. They help you to identify other assets. They're not really the implementers that will help entrepreneurs, but the information that they aggregate is absolutely essential to mapping the assets that live or exist right next door to where you live. Keep in mind, most of the innovation assets are concentrated in high-density urban areas. Where do you live? In higher density urban areas. However, those assets, unlike where I grew up in Detroit, where we could see prosperity in the form of plants and cranes and smokestacks and so on, this economy is invisible to those who are disconnected from it. Our charge is to make that visible.
But if I could add to that too, because I think the way accelerators, incubators, maker spaces, co-worker space look in our community has to look different. Because one, it's been a very exclusive reality, though it exists in an urban, dense area, it has not necessarily existed for us in our community. And going off of what we spoke about earlier, the funding that has been available for us has been 100% dedicated to mom and pop business starting, which has been extremely effective, right? South Florida is amazing at creating mom and pops. But getting those businesses to the next step in terms of how we think about co-working, accelerating, tech ed, is very much about doing that transitional work that you maybe don't have to do at the lab or you don't have to do at Venture High, but we want to really do that transitional work to get our community to think beyond the mom and pop, because it's not the idea that's bad. We have the skill set, we have the innovation to think big and create these ideas, but you don't go from middle class to that world without having access, right? And without having understanding of how to scale and frame. And so I think the work that we've been talking about doing is really framing our accelerator spaces differently and providing that level of support for our community around how do you take that mom and pop, let's create revenue enough to take care of my family, to a point where you can hire 5 people, then 10 people, then a couple hundred people, because I think that framework, it literally doesn't exist in our business corridors.
And I was going to say that I think someone once said to me that there's 2 types of entrepreneurs. There's a lifestyle entrepreneur, which is what you're talking about,
Yep.
and then there's an entrepreneur that wants to change the world. And we have excelled at the lifestyle entrepreneurs, and the problem is that we haven't been able to then scale them to the 2nd or 3rd generation. And I think what we have to do now, what incubators like yours are doing and companies like mine are really trying to get the people that have an entrepreneurial spirit to move beyond the lifestyle company and to move into, we are going to create something that will affect people outside of my immediate community. And I think that's the challenge. I certainly think we have the ability and the brains within the community, but we do have to have the funding, and then we have to have the mindset that precedes that funding.
Keep in mind, Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without demand, never has, never will. We have not yet demanded, and I don't mean in a silly, half-hearted, sappy kind of way, but by our excellence demanded to connect into where your tax dollars are being invested to nurture and cultivate the innovation economy. There are no bars keeping us out of the accelerators that exist next door to us. So the willingness to compete and show up and demand to be a part of this is something that we have to do. We have to do. My brother said, you know what? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So your job is to make the horse thirsty. Our horse is not yet thirsty. Black Tech Week helps to create thirst in our community.
Because one of the things that's happened in this startup city, if you will, is the flight of the black entrepreneurs or black people in general, moving out of South Florida, moving out of, you go to college someplace else, and up to now, people have been going and staying wherever they were because the environment was so much better. And now because there is a influx of people coming in from other places and people coming back, which is a great thing. So it's up to us to create the environment that is welcoming, that will make these positive things happen. And the diversity in our community is great. The melting pot doesn't always melt, and it's not melting. And so when you're at the table and you're not, when you're on the table or not at the table, and you don't have any leverage. So Black Tech for me is a great way to create some leverage, and then now you're at the table with a different conversation than begging to be included.
Can I give you something real quick that's practical, right now, that everybody can do? Because we're talking about capital, and we're talking about what can entrepreneurs do right now, and we have accelerators and incubators, but they need funding. And if you're not connected to your local innovation ecosystem and your venture capital, your angels and your VCs, and you don't know the difference between the two, which we should, if your education institutions like this one doesn't have those resources, the EDA.gov has 6 investment priorities. One of those investment priorities is economically disconnected communities, connecting them to the innovation, the global innovation economy. That is an investment priority of the federal government. And if your regional development organization and your SEDS plan does not include asking for that money, as Jonathan said, you're not asking for it. It exists. And the tech folks, the tech companies, anybody heard of ITSMF? Information Technology Senior Management Forum. These are your African Americans who are in high levels in tech companies, Cisco, Intel, Google, the whole works. They are trying to build an African American pipeline of entrepreneurs and management folks. They don't know how to do that. HBCUs are kind of like scattered. They can't work with them. So the money exists in both the corporate America, in the federal government, in the foundations, and we have not gone to the people who plan and say, here's our plan. You need to put money in this.
Well, can I just say one last thing? I mean, I think that's, and I agree with you, I think clearly what is necessary, maybe this is what your organization is doing, is to create some sort of clearinghouse where this information is available and where people can connect into that. Because as you're saying, there's a lot of disparate resources out there, but if you don't know about it, it doesn't really matter. And so I think what is really necessary is to create some sort of Uber organization, and not to use the word Uber as a taxi, but Uber is an overarching organization that really will provide this information and will then connect with the proper types of sources so that we can not reinvent the wheel. Because there's so many different organizations that have, well, this one and this one and this one. Well, let's all do it together. Let's have one single clearinghouse that will provide the information that entrepreneurs need to be in this tech economy and to be a driving part of it, not just on the edges.
Agreed. So thank you. Let's thank our wonderful panel.